Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Q&A. We have with us Maya Zinstein and A.B. Troen. Thank you both for joining us. And thank you so much for this really illuminating film. I'm really impressed with the journalistic focus, and I'm so happy and thrilled for you that you've completed this really amazing piece of work. So let's dive in. Maya, I wanted to ask you, because many of our audience members saw Forever Pure and are familiar with that film, your past work. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you approach documentary film. Can you share with us your manifesto, so to speak? How are you approaching the journalistic point of view in your work, and maybe talk about how Forever Pure differs from Till Kingdom Come in that respect?
Thank you, Lexi. And first of all, I want to say thank you to the Jewish Film Institute and for you for supporting us and bringing us to the final film. You played a very important role in this process, so thank you. And I'm very glad to be with your audience. I wish I could be there in person, but maybe next time, a next film.
Definitely next time.
It's an interesting question, I have to say. Now, the basis would be probably that it needs to be interesting for me. I always working, I don't know if you can say it in English, but like from my stomach. If something really makes me angry, that's always a good sign to start digging. I guess it comes from my journalistic investigative background. This feeling is something that you need to go into these long journeys. And sometimes in these journeys, you don't find the answers at the end, but you need this motivation to start this journey. I have to say, I think there's actually many similarities between Forever Pure and Till Kingdom Come, both of them dealing with the questions of religion and the place of religion in our secular lives. I think it's fascinating, and of course the combination of faith and power and money. It's definitely the areas that I found them just fascinating, because they have so much influence on our daily lives, and they're really changing our societies. I don't know if it's true, but once I read an article that many times immigrants really to be able to feel part of their new society, they're really trying to have an influence on the society. And so as an immigrant from Russia, it was 30 years ago, but still, I think it's part of my relationship with Israel. It's just to try to make this place better. And the only thing that I know how to do is films. So that's my way, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Forever Pure and with this film, as you say, perhaps there's something in the material that struck your gut. I have to say, I find your approach to the subjects in this film very compassionate, and you're really giving voice to multiple points of view. So would you say that in this film you went into it with an openness to listen and to accurately represent the point of view of the multiple subjects in the film? And how do you think about journalism that way, rather than inserting your point of view as a documentarian onto the structure of the film?
Well, I have to say that I think as a documentary filmmaker, you have to come with an open heart. You really have to. Even and of course I have my opinions, but still I'm dealing here with human beings, and I'm not doing propaganda to any side. And to be honest, I think propaganda is just not interesting. And I also think it has a very specific, like, I really believe that the way of telling stories, of kind of letting people to make their own decisions, what they think on the subject, has much more power on actually changing things, because no one wants to feel that they're taught, and no one, I don't think most of the people don't want to feel that the filmmaker is kind of pushing his agenda. Because then I think the audience feels that it doesn't have their free will to actually decide what they think on this topic. So I think in both, in Forever Pure and in Till Kingdom Come, I, and I guess it's part of who I am, you know, to really to try to go to new situations and into new worlds and try to explore them and make your opinion on these questions down the road, and not at the beginning. Yeah, I think, and of course, you know, there's probably a reason why I'm kind of moved from journalism, and those, of course, I'm constantly using the tools that I learned as a journalist in my documentary filmmaking, but I'm not a journalist anymore. I'm making documentaries, and I think the biggest for me, as a journalist, you talk to people's minds, and as a documentary filmmakers, you talk to people's hearts. And I think on this way, you have actually a much bigger opportunity to actually to change something.
Yeah, yeah. I sense such a feeling of intimacy in the film. AB and Maya, you're both very present. Only we only hear from you, Maya, a handful of times, meaning your own voice, and AB, you're talked to in the film. Can you talk about how you two work together and what kind of a crew you had with you to get that intimacy? You definitely know these people very well, and even when you're not talking, we're very aware of your presence. Can you talk about that a little bit, both of you, from your own perspectives? AB, what do you think first?
Well, I think, you know, going into the project, literally from shoot day number one, there was a sense that these were topics that are covered by the media. These are things that you will see in the front pages or in one-liners on Facebook, for that matter. And as it so happened, our first shoot day is a scene that did not make the final cut, and that was shot in Mar-a-Lago in Trump's estate in Florida. And, you know, we were two people shooting, and to be able to come and get close to someone, try to film it as you would a dinner party, you know, trying to understand what makes people tick, why are they there, what do they believe in, was something that, you know, remained true literally for the 2.5 years that we were working on this. And in terms of questions of access and trust and intimacy, you know, I think there was a tremendous amount of curiosity, both from us towards everyone we filmed, and I think they were equally curious about who we were. So for instance, in the church in Kentucky, these were people who, you know, some of them had rarely left the county, Bell County in eastern Kentucky, but they had Israeli flags waving outside their church and had been taught to love the Jewish people since they were children. And to have two Israeli Jewish filmmakers arrive with cameras at this congregation was not only something that was really life-changing, I would say, for the two of us. I think for many of them, it was also a rare opportunity. So this led to a lot of rich discussions, both in front of the camera and also when the camera was shut off. And this ranged from, you know, issues like church and state, or the relationship between Israel and the United States, but also to sort of more human issues like legacy, that they would say, well, this is what our parents and grandparents have taught us, and I don't know anything more Jewish than Ve'gadet ala bincha, passing on the tradition from generation to generation. So I think the final product is a little bit of a mesh of both those things, sort of the big picture ideas, right? Filming at the White House at the end, and all the way down to issues of family, tradition, legacy, and heritage.
Yeah, I guess I want to dive deeper into the trust issue. So what were your conversations like in terms of, how did you explain what you were trying to do with this film to the subjects that you were able to enlist in the film? And, did that dialogue continue throughout the process, discussing what your intentions were with the film?
I think, Maya, how do you wanna?
Oh, you can start and I will join you.
All right, I think there are a couple of things. There are several sort of decisions we made starting out, again, that I think we kept to 2.5 years later. One was allowing people to tell the story in their voice. So, if we were asked, what will people think? The answer was, well, people who think this is a wonderful relationship will, see that it's represented, and people who don't will definitely not. And I think that 2.5 years later, the responses we received, starting from our first premiere at Dok Aviv, Yael Eckstein and some of the settler subjects wrote that they thought it was a wonderful film and an accurate depiction of what they believe. So that was something very, very important. In other words, this was not going to be a film with a New York Times or San Francisco Chronicle journalist saying, the evangelicals are ta-da-da-da-da. No, it would be spoken by them. The other issue is that I think they all watched Forever Pure. And so they had a sense sort of how Maya likes to tell stories. And, it was clear to them that this was not Breitbart making the film or the Jerusalem Post, that this would have nuances and complexities. And I think this is something that they were, they engaged in and were willing to go down that road. I think finally, the most important thing is that this film also means different things to different people. We discovered it while filming it, and we are discovering it now in these Q&As, where, now we're at JFI WinterFest, but we've had discussions with, I would say, or groups that are more right of center within the Jewish community in the United States. We've had conversations with Palestinian Christians. We've had conversations in Israel, each one completely different point of view in their assumptions, what they think the characters represent. If you're an American, means, one thing. For an Israeli, it's a totally different set of issues. And I think that the characters also each brought different assumptions to working with us, what it would mean. And that also they each perceive the end product also with slightly different set of eyes.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, I definitely think you got nuance and complexity, and, no one is a one-dimensional portrayal. I'm curious about triggers, the idea of triggers. I think Yael first discusses this, and I'm curious about when you both were diving into this material, there may have been certain trigger points. I guess it came up for the first time for her, and you confronted it directly with Pastor Williams. I'm wondering if you could talk about that idea of trigger and how you might have been triggered during different points in the process, and then how you dealt with moving past that.
Yeah, so first I want to add to your previous question, because I think there's another really important ingredient that Avi haven't mentioned, which is, I guess it was also the combination of us. So we were just two of us. And in that sense, AB was really the very perfect partner for this. I think we share some abilities of just to connect to situations and people. And that was crucial, really, and be flexible on the ground and be open. I really think that this is the very essence of documentary filmmaking, of be able to adapt yourself to the situation, and for that you need people that actually are able to do that. so I think it's really it's actually, this is the very core why it all succeeded and happened. So I just wanted to add on that. And for the trigger, I think
you're saying in that it was just the two of you.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was only the two of us.
Yeah, so I think that's really important for our audiences to know. I mean, you know, that means that you're a very tight unit of production, and the intimacy that you got, I think, yes, absolutely, is completely connected to who the two of you are as people and how you were able to interact with the camera on and when it was off.
exactly. Yeah, and I have to say, I think this is, and you know, of course, it's maybe makes it more complicated than a production side of this, because it's just two of us and we need to get, you know, go with lots of stuff in many suitcases, travel, and it's maybe more difficult, but it was really a decision, and I think this is the best, really, I think this is the way to make that kind of tight documentaries, when it's just a very small crew and they working as really as one unit, and they understand each other, you know, from one look, and they know how to read human situations, and they know how to respond and to be flexible. So this cooperation, this is I always call it alliance. It's more than cooperation, and I think this is the key for everything, you know, beyond all the other stuff that AB mentioned. And I think it also connected to the question of triggers. I think, you know, it was difficult because it was really traveling out of the world that we are used to live in, and really meet people that very much different than us, and sometimes, you know, starting from the questions of religion. I'm a secular person. AB grew up in a more religious family, but still, you know, we're and suddenly find ourselves in truly surrounded by very religious people. This is a totally different situation, and of course there were questions of us being Jews, and the one time that we're showing in the film that we that the pastor tries to convert us is really just there were many more of these, let's say it that way. And at the beginning, when it happens to you for the first time, this is really shocking. And again, I'm not a religious person at any level, but still, your faith is something really personal, and something that you're growing up with. And then when someone from one hand says that he loves you, but on the other hand very quickly goes to the situation of trying to really convince you that you're mistaken, I think at the beginning, I remember, you know, these evenings that AB and me were discussing it, and it was really difficult, but then unfortunately kind of getting used to it. Yeah, but it was always so it was really to be like kind of very different, you know, just in a totally different world. And then when you're coming out of this world, you understand what happened to you. And again, I'm just saying it, and above all of that, I have to say 99% of the people that we met were wonderful people, really nice people, but they have their own worldview, and many times they tried, you know, to convince us that we are wrong, and there were many more, I think, you know, but that's the thing. I think you constantly need to remember what is the reason that you are there. And the reason is that you feel that you're telling a really important story that needs to be told, and you're the vessel, like you're the tool to tell it to the world. So you kind of putting it aside and move forward. But yeah, it was fascinating and complicated on the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the triggers not only about the end of the story kind of differing, as Yael mentioned, but also anti-Semitic ideas that come into the conversation, specifically about Jews and money and arrogance and I wondered if, you know, how you dealt with the complexities of the Christian white supremacy kind of strain, and then this more pro-Israel religious side of the story. AB, do you want to talk about that a little bit, about the
Yeah,
complexities there?
I think, well, first of all, it's just important to say a couple things generally about the subject, is that we need to be also careful with generalizations. This is true for any group, but also specifically evangelicals are not a monolith. So, you know, all Catholics believe in the Pope, but evangelicals, each strand has their own particular strand and ideology. And I also, with nearly all of the folks that we filmed with, there was specifically no sense of white supremacy. On the contrary, I think there was also an openness to many issues that were progressive, even though there were very clear limits to other issues, let's say LGBT rights, women's rights, where it was 180 degrees, anything but that. So that was just important to express. In terms of navigating those complexities, that's a great question. I think, like Maya said, it was very complex. I think, you know, the film, I'll answer it this way. I think when Trump came to power, even though that feels like prehistoric times from the Biden and the Kamala Harris administration now, but when he came to power, there was a sense of, how did this happen? At least amongst many of my colleagues and friends. And many people dealt with it in different ways, whether it was to uplift causes that we felt were being infringed upon, or rights, you know, be it the LGBTQ community or immigrant rights, et cetera, that we thought, okay, this is the moment we need to take care of this, or use film as a means to protect these communities. And I think what Maya and I basically spent the majority of the Trump administration on that other side. And in many ways, I think that it was difficult. And in many ways, I think it was also a really unique and important opportunity for us to realize that this is a big fabric of the American, or a big piece of the American fabric of democracy, and that this is not something that is going to disappear at all. Not, you know, in 2020 it didn't disappear, and it's not going to disappear in 2024 or looking into the future. And I think it was really incredible, as Maya said, that we met a lot of not only, you know, nice people, but amazing people who we could almost see eye to eye in similarities, like, oh, we share so much, we have a tremendous amount in common. And yet there are certain, you know, articles of their faith and ideology which are vastly different than things that we believe in. And I think being able to reconcile those two things, which are true, you know, was mind-boggling at times, and really, really difficult. And it was an exercise in what documentary filmmaking is, and in what being a citizen of this country means at the same time. So, you know, I think, as I said, it was a privilege. I think, as Maya said, it's extremely, extremely confusing. And I almost feel like recommending it to any one of your audience members. If you want to know what it's like being a US citizen or a Jew in 2021, well, go on an airplane and spend 3 years in churches in Kentucky, and you'll come back with a new appreciation of that.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that really points out sort of the question about the timeline of the film, because of course, you know, you couldn't imagine or guess what the outcome of our elections would be. And so when the film was finished and, you know, you premiered it on the festival circuit, you know, we were in a certain political context, and now we're in another. I'm curious, how did that unfold, you know, the completion of the film, and sort of affecting how you were finishing the story? And then how has that impacted your outreach and distribution plans?
Yeah, I think, it was basically it was pretty clear for us that we want to track the outcomes of this Jewish Christian bond um, with during Trump's administration, and yes, we wanted to release this film before the election, which we are. I do think though that in a way, I think it would be a mistake just to connect this film only to Trump, because the Bible exists 2,000 years and it's not about disappear soon, as long as I know. And of course, also now that 25% of the American population, which are see themselves as Christian evangelicals. So I think actually now, I feel that there's more space to have these conversations. In 2 years, there's another elections in United States. And yeah, every 4 years you change your president, not like we are here keeping our prime minister for many, many years. So I think this, and this bond has existed for the last 40 years. And I really think that it's here to stay. And I think this film raises huge questions to the American Jewish community, how we deal with that, and what is our place within this new relationship that the state of Israel really strengthened with this community, and what are the challenges for the Jewish community, let's say, when they see this such a strong alliance between Israel and the Christian evangelicals. So yeah, I do, of course, yeah, it was an interesting process to connect your documentary, which documentary is supposed to be timeless, to something very, very specific, and to a question, what would be the outcome of the elections, and is this film would be still relevant after the elections. But I think we're constantly learning more and more lessons, and that's why I love this. I love documentary filmmaking so much. You're constantly learning, and I think what I see now, actually, people has the space to have the conversation, even especially because Trump is not in power anymore. So they really questioning themselves also how it happened to us and how we made it to this point. And again, there's still 70 million people that voted for Trump. So I really think that this issue is here to stay, and I'm really glad that this film, as it seems now, is going to have a long life, and yeah, and I'm sure it will stay relevant.
If I could just address your question about completion. This was a particularly, like, all the wonderful things that you said about the film, like having the characters say it in their own voice and there being intimacy while a point of view, all these things turn out to be really complicated in the editing room to craft. And it took a tremendous amount of patience and sensitivity to detail and to get it just right, because the slightest change had the biggest ripple effect on how you perceived any one of these issues or characters. And it was very, very important to us to represent their story with integrity. So I would say we had the film, 90% done or 80% done just about a year ago, with our final shoot being the Trump peace plan. That was literally the exclamation point to say, the proof is in the puddings. We're in the White House. Netanyahu is here. Trump is here. The room is filled with evangelical, influential pastors, not a single Palestinian. This is part of the narrative we're trying to tell. We arrived back in Israel, COVID struck, and there was a sense of, we, not to use religious terminology, but we need a miracle. And thank God, we were fortunate enough to receive also the JFI Completion Grant. And, in the narrative arc of the filmmaking process, I don't know if I should say that was the dark night of the soul just before that, but it was, definitely a trying period with COVID. How do we finish this film? And we are extremely appreciative to JFI, because that really allowed us to give that final 10 to 20% of crafting the film to the finish line, because those fine tunings make almost a life or death difference for if you make blanket statements about other people, or say, I appreciated this character, but it made me think afterwards. And in terms of those changes and where we're seeing them now, as I said, we're doing Q&As where, there's been an aide from the Bush administration together with us, and we've done Q&As where the Palestinian pastor in the film, Munther, just the other day was with us in a conversation.
Uh-oh. Well, while we're waiting for AB to come back, I guess I want to follow up on that. Just talking about the Palestinian pastor, Munther Isaac, in the film, and the two strands of support coming from the evangelical community and the settler community. I'm just wondering what the Palestinian Christian screenings and response has been like. Is it similar to the to Yael's response to the film? Oh, and you just need to unmute.
I think, first of all, we received a very strong responses from the Palestinian side. They were very happy that this issue finally being discussed, because they feel that this influences exist on the ground for very long, but they felt that, and again, I don't want to speak in their behalf, but from what I heard, I think many of them felt that finally someone speaks about this issue, that they found extremely relevant for their lives. It's really affects their daily life on daily basis. I do think that and during the filmmaking, we had a lot of questions of how we actually showing the Palestinian side of this bond, because definitely and for sure they are the ones that has the biggest impact on their lives, because as long as Israel continue to occupy territories, they're living under the military rule. So and it's very clear from seeing the film that the Christian evangelicals has a tremendous power on kind of keeping the status quo of the situation now here. So yeah, and I really hope that we would be able to show this film more also to Palestinian communities, and to take it further. I think Reverend Munther Isaac was an amazing character, really. So he's really smart, and the scene between him and Pastor Boyd, it's definitely one of at the top of the most amazing scenes that I think that exist in the film, really, because I think in this, it's such a quiet scene, and they really, both of them speaking very nicely, but you really can feel them. They sit so close to each other, but you really can feel how far they are, and what a huge gap there's between them, which of course extremely, for me it was very sad, because and I'm not going into the questions of the differences in Christianity, and of course I know they exist, but the bottom line is they're brothers, and they just, and you see how the politics is much stronger than the common faith that they are sharing. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I agree that scene was something, I certainly have never seen a scene like that on film. And so I think it really provokes conversation, and it's very thought-provoking scene for sure. I guess I wanted to just kind of go back to this idea of intimacy, and especially with Pastor Boyd. So I'm curious about after that scene, we then kind of hear his reaction to the conversation. And I'm just wondering if you ever heard any thoughts of questioning things coming from Pastor Boyd as a result of being in this film, or any of the other subjects that you talked with. Was there any sense of, that makes me think more about something?
Hey, AB, good to have you back.
Welcome back.
I'm so like literally the electricity in the entire house went off. Like it wasn't really like this has not happened to us before. And I kept on talking for like another 40 seconds about the Jewish Film Institute, and I was like, blah blah blah. Anyway.
And you're in Israel right now, not in Texas, in the U.S.
I'm in Los Angeles right now, so you know.
Oh, you're in Los Angeles. That's right. You're in Los Angeles right now.
We are connected to the grid. I'm so sorry, guys.
That's right. That's right. No.
Well, here in Israel, is everything fine with the electricity? It's there in LA, nothing is working.
There you go.
So, you know, it's interesting because I remember that I'll go back to, for us going to film this scene between Pastor Boyd and Reverend Munder. And I have to say, I had this hope in my heart that Boyd would be able, you know, to see at least the complexity of the situation on the ground. And you know, of course, as a filmmaker, to have a certain scene towards the end when your character is you know, maybe opens its mind and asks himself questions, you know, something that we always hope that will happen. And I remember, and of course nothing of that happened. And I remember the writer of the film, Mark Monroe, told me, Maya, in documentaries, people don't change. They change only in Hollywood films. And you know, yeah, I think it's almost naive to think that someone that, you know, had these views and in a certain way being indoctrinated, and he's the one that using this term, not me. I would never think to use the term, but that's what he says about himself, that he will just change his mind, you know, or see the light of one experience. That's just something that is not happening. Yeah, unfortunately, most of the time people do not change their minds, and you know, and I think even expect it from them would be wrong. Yeah, I do think it's a film about indoctrination, and I would say that both of our many of the characters in this film actually indoctrinated by themselves to a very specific point of view. And you know, and I really love them on a personal level dearly, but I do see how they are not able sometimes, or don't want to see the broader picture. And I'm sure that Adi will have to add on this question as well. He had a few calls with the Pastor Boyd after the film, after they watched the film, and it would be interesting for you to listen.
Are we, just to confirm, we're talking about the scene between Pastor Boyd and Pastor Munther?
Yeah.
So just the one thing to add is that we spoke to Pastor Boyd about this afterwards, and he had read articles about him not seeing the plight of the Palestinians or understanding what the Palestinian pastor was talking about in that moment. And you know, and Pastor Boyd is really a remarkable person. He's very intelligent and sensitive, and I would say also reflective. And so he said, I saw those things, but ultimately, you know, this is not my community. This is not what I've been raised to. The only way I could have gotten into trouble was if I had spoken something against President Trump, because that is something that the members of his community care about. And I think there within is a really important lesson. Again, we all have the audiences that we think we're speaking to. And that's something to bear in mind, both when we think about our subjects and about the film itself, the way it comes out. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking about that, Maya, what you had mentioned about it's a film about indoctrination. And when we go back to the very opening of the film, you know, part of that indoctrination was the Jews are better than us. And then we see the unfolding of, you know, the section of the film where you describe the story of the rapture and Armageddon, and then the consequences that will befall anyone who doesn't convert in the final moment. And those things seem really far apart from one another. And so I'm wondering how you experienced that contradiction, and if there were scenes that we didn't see in the film where you delved more deeply into some of those contradictions.
You know, the thing is that I think in the way that they see it, it's not a contradiction. It's just part of the different stages of the story, of their story and of their prophecy. And it's all works very well, you know. and that's the, I think that's the thing. We need to, I think, as the Jewish people, we need to understand that we have a role in this process, and you know, different stages, different roles, and I didn't feel that there's some yeah, they truly believe that we are the chosen people, and that and that the Jews are the chosen people, and that they have a role, of a very central role on the process of the return of Jesus Christ. But then when he's back, our role is over. You know, so
Yeah.
and that's the and that's the key for everything. And to be honest, I have to say, I don't think we need to take it personally.
Yeah.
But but I have to say about the contradictions, I think mainly for me, and that was the very beginning of the process. You know, when you start to look into this subject, the first thing that you see and hear constantly is the word love. And you just keep hearing we love you, and we love you. And then I think it's in the first time, because it's such a surprising usage of this word love, so suddenly you ask yourself, but what it actually means. You know, when someone usually says to you that he loves you, you don't ask what it means. But here we felt that this is something that we really need to, you know, to kind of to put this word apart and say, but what is the meaning of this? And that was the beginning of this journey. And there you find the contradictions, because from one hand, when someone loves you, usually he won't try to change you. That's, you know, the basis of love. And also when you love someone, you usually know him, right? You love him for a certain I don't know, things that he represents, and some certain emotions. And actually there where I found the contradictions, there where I found the conflict, because this very strange translation of words that we used to hear, and you know, and I think the best explanation for this that I received was from a young evangelical guy that was honest enough just to say, listen guy, because I asked him, I think for the first year that was the question that was going everywhere, and just saying, but what it actually means that you love me. and then he was honest enough to say, you need to understand, when they say to you that they love you, they actually mean that they love Jesus, and you're just part of the story.
Yeah.
So we cannot make it without you, and you are the key. You are the key for the door. And then he also said that you know what you do with the key after the door is open. And I think this was the first time that kind of everything came together to me. It's really not personal, really. And that's why we should not take it personal.
You know, thank you for clarifying that, because I think for me, and I'll just speak for me as a fairly secular human, this was really the first time I thought you did such a great job, you know, with the story of the rapture. And I think because you've been immersed in this story for so long, you're much more able to occupy that headspace and kind of understand, and just framing it as the role that we play in the story or the narrative that is being told. And really, what is this life except that we're all in our story and the people are playing different roles. So I think that's really clarifying, actually, to look at it that way. And yeah.
Just add to that, that perhaps a useful way of thinking about it is, some would see this as a horror film where one group plays into the imagination or fantasy of the other. Other people might say that this is actually a romantic comedy where, you know, each side of the relationship kind of approaches it with their own perspective, and it is kind of a film about what love means to each of these groups, even if that love means something different. So I think, yeah, you know, using those two genres is also a useful tool when thinking about the end times Christians and Jews, because ultimately these are just two very, very strange bedfellows.
Yeah. So I want to start wrapping up, and I'm just curious to know, you know, what are your plans with the film? How can people share this film with their family and friends? How can other people see it? What can we expect next?
So the film is starting following JFI WinterFest. The film is going to be available to be distributed in all 50 states at Watch at Home. So instead of going to the movie theater, unfortunately, you will be able to watch it from your living room, but through specific venues, movie theaters. That way you can support your local theater and watch the film. We are also doing a whole series of discussions at institutions, synagogues, universities, and really having a frank conversation within the community at the moment. And this is, again, anywhere from Florida to Missouri. And the film is going to be broadcast on Independent Lens on PBS in the end of March. And, you know, we hope it's going to have a very long and happy life.
Yeah, well, I know it will. We're super honored to have played a small role in making sure that this film gets out into the world. We're really looking forward to seeing how it lands with the Independent Lens screening, and JFI will certainly broadcast out to our community all the information about upcoming screenings. I want to thank you both so much for joining us for WinterFest, and I want to thank all of you tuning in at home. Be safe and be well.
Thank you.